On today's World Insight with Tianwei, parts of the Notre-Dame in Paris up in smoke. What's the damage to France's cultural heritage? And the first round of trade talks between the U.S. and Japan kicks off. Can these political allies find common ground on trade?
And welcome to World Insight with me, Tianwei. The program is coming to you live from Monday to Friday on CGTN. In the French capital, Paris, where the world watched in shock as part of the historic Notre-Dame Cathedral went up in smoke. Authorities say the damage is significant, but the fire is now under control.
A solemn moment as brave firefighters tackle a blaze that engulfed Notre-Dame Cathedral Monday night. Authorities had some crumbs of comfort for those in distress, saying the structure had been saved. But there's no doubt that severe damage has been done. Footage taken by the Paris Fire Brigade shows just how devastating the blaze was, with the cathedral's roof, spire, and towers all up in smoke and flames. But there's a feeling much more has been lost than just the iconic structures.
That is irreplaceable, not so much the wood structures, because that could be replaced and that's going to collapse. The spire, which is beautiful, is a 19th century construct, so that possibly can be replaced. Some will be lost, of course, because you can't replace exactly, but it still will be lost. But I think the rose windows, the stained glass windows, I mean, that's just really replaceable.
And it couldn't really have come at a worse time for the nation or the country's president. President Emmanuel Macron was preparing to deliver a televised address to the French people. It was to outline his plans for the political future of the country in the face of the ongoing Yellow Vest protests. Instead, he had to rush to the scene of the fire and deliver a much different speech.
Alors je vous le dis très solennellement ce soir.
I am solemnly telling you tonight, this cathedral will be rebuilt by all of us together, and it's probably part of France's destiny, and it will be our project for the years to come. I am committed to this. We will rebuild Notre-Dame, because this is what the French expect, because this is what our history deserves, because it's our profound destiny.
Perhaps Macron and the country will be able to use this fire to reach new heights. This iconic landmark has witnessed and survived every major event in modern France, from a social and political revolution in the late 18th century to World War II. Each time, France was rebuilt, rising from the ashes, as this timeless cathedral remained. This time, however, it'll be France that needs to stand tall, and the cathedral that needs rebuilding. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
For the Notre-Dame fire in Paris, we are joined by Joab Toker, a professor at the American Graduate School in Paris. And in our Beijing studio, we have Professor Dong Qiang, the head of the French department from Peking University. Later in our program, we're also going to be joined by François-Henri Pinault, who is the chairman and CEO of Karen, who has been vowing to donate 100 million euro already for the repair of the cathedral. But first of all, Professor and two professors, shall I say, welcome to our program. Professor Toker, go to you first. A very sad day, of course, for many of us who love the cathedral.
A tragic day, absolutely a tragic day. One of those rare moments in which I think every person individually feels that there is some kind of combination of sentiments and feelings and thoughts and references that are mixed together in a whole variety of values and dimensions. And all that is just in front of us in such a small world which transmits those pictures and those sounds and those sentiments just all across the planet. I mean, we don't have so many spots on Earth, you know, which regroup so rapidly and so intensively all these things over one single spot, and I'm afraid that what has happened last evening in Paris is one of them.
Yes, indeed. Professor Dong Qiang, as an ardent student in the way of the French culture, and certainly a great bridge between China and France, you have been, as intellectual, studying the French culture and also all the works related to the cathedral. Tell me about what is your take about what it represents?
For me, it's just like the professor says, a tragedy, and I was really very sad when I saw all the images. You know, Victor Hugo and this novel and his other novels are so popular in China. Every students, and when we are very young already, we have read a lot of novels and the French literatures, and Victor Hugo is one of the most famous. You know, people are very familiar with persons in the novel, like Esmeralda, as Quasimodo, and I think everybody, even they don't have read the book, even they never went to Paris, they know about the story, they know the Cathedral of Paris, and they know even the story of the novel. They know what happened, you know. So this is really, I think, which is important with the Cathedral of Paris, that is one part of not only French destiny, as the president said. I think it's a part of humanity, all humanity. And for Chinese people who go to Paris, everybody wants to take a picture with the cathedral, and you know, this. I think there's three symbols of monuments who are symbols of Paris. You know, you have the Louvre, you have the Eiffel Tower, and you have Notre-Dame de Paris. You know, I think these three monuments are different for different significance and different symbols.
Right, indeed. Mr. Toker, of course, Professor Dong emphasized on the literature, which gives an extended value of what Notre-Dame has been standing for. But to a Frenchman like you, and to someone who has witnessed on TV what really happened over there, what do you make of the process with which the world has been paying their tribute to this beautiful architecture and put to this beautiful cultural symbol?
Yes, I think that the way the world, so to speak, has reacted, very much so in parallel to the way French people reacted. I don't think that it is indeed it is a French cathedral. These are French stones, and these were French engineers and artists to some extent which built this cathedral. But it belongs to humanity, and it has crossed centuries. It has crossed wars of religions. It has crossed two major world wars which brought so much destruction to Europe. It has crossed social turmoils and revolutions in France itself, and so much animosity. And here it is, yesterday, eaten partially by fire. So we're speaking about something which actually exceeds us as individuals and as French people or Europeans. And this is why I think that Notre-Dame de Paris belongs to the world, belongs to humanity.
Right.
Sometimes you have tendency to say, I don't want to go into philosophical type of reflection, but sometimes you tend to say that whatever goes through time and succeeds crossing time are only two things: stones and words. And here, indeed, we're in front of a monument of stones and other marvelous pieces of art which has crossed 8-9 centuries, right?
Yes, indeed. It's not just about the centuries. It's also about the hearts and minds and the artistic values that people have been keep on putting onto Notre-Dame, and the personal stories that has happened throughout the centuries that has made this architecture what it is and why it stands out among all. Professor Dong, I know you personally also have your own tours and also academic studies into the Notre-Dame. What do you make of those personal stories that you have with this symbol of French culture and beyond, Professor Dong?
You know, when it's a great classic, you know, every period of your life, you go back to the book and you back to the monument. And every time you find something new, you can put yourself with the story, and you understand much more the story. And you know, when you arrive in Paris and you go to there, the cathedral is there, and then you are just calm. You know, I'm in Paris. You know, this kind of feeling. That's why everybody will be very sad when they go to Paris and find the spy is not there. But I think also, which is very important, we talk about a tragedy, but I will insist on one thing, that it's also an accident. Yeah. You know, so we will not insist too much about the tragedy. I think the French president said the French people will rebuild the Notre-Dame. I'm sure, because I know the French people are very, very strong in this domain of patrimoine, you know, the heritage.
Talking about the friends, we're also having so many different people joining the circle of support. For example, those coming from the business community. François-Henri Pinault is one of them. He and his family immediately pledged 100 million euro to rebuild and renovate the Notre-Dame Cathedral in Paris. And we're having him on the phone right now. Mr. Pinault, what a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me too.
Tell me, what is really behind your decision?
Well, I was last night watching with my family the tragedy of Notre-Dame, and it was really a shock. It was striking everyone, the kids, the adults, all the French people, and much beyond that. And I felt urgently a need to make something, to move, and I decided immediately to commit to the restoration of the cathedral. It's such an important building for humanity, not just French, not just the Catholic religion. It's important for everyone. It's about humanity. So I decided to put immediately 100 million euros of my resources, my family resources, from my family office to the restoration of Notre-Dame.
And about Notre-Dame, to you, what is it personally, and also to the human being even, as a very important treasure of our world?
Well, it represents so many things. It's about our country, it's our history, our culture, our national pride, and it's about spirituality also. And you know, this cathedral has been built between the 12th century and the 14th century, 200 years, with so many people, so many artists, so many creators putting their heart in that building. It's such an important icon of the mankind history, much more than France. So, and this is why it was striking to see how everyone was reacting. As I said, young kids that don't even know about the history of Notre-Dame, adults, and those people crying in France, looking at Notre-Dame on fire and crying in Paris. It was, and every one of us, we felt that inside of us, something was broken inside. So I felt this need to move and to do something.
Mr. Pinault, are you satisfied with the process which the fire was fought? And what about now? What do you consider as a love of the nation? The cathedral should be repaired from your perspective, of course.
Yeah, first of all, I have to praise the firemen of Paris that did an amazing job, because it is such a complicated location in Paris. It's a very dense location in the deep center of Paris, so it was difficult to access. It's on an island, as you know, inside Paris, so they did an amazing job to try to avoid the worst. And as you know, the structure of the cathedral is still there, so this is the most important thing. So now we'll have to rebuild all the roof and all the thing that has been, but we need to repair it in the right way. It has to be done following the rules that have been followed for the for almost 1,000 years. Try to find the right woods, the right technique that we used at the time to make it as close as possible as it was before, not just a quick restoration. It has to be done in the proper way. So, and I'm sure that the French government and the French authorities that will lead the restoration will do it very properly.
Mr. Pinault, finally, before you go, we met each other at a time when you were making this very important contribution from your family as well, the statues of the rat and the rabbit coming from the old summer palace of China, and you donated that back to the National Museum in China. To you, treasures of all countries and cultures, how shall we better protect it from a lover of culture?
Well, we need to be very aware of the importance of culture and all those symbols that unite a country, a people around them. So, without culture, without our own history, each people are lost. So, in such a global world, we need to cherish all those elements of our collective culture. And then, when I had this opportunity to do this gesture towards the Chinese people, it was important for me because I knew that would represent so many things for this country, for the Chinese people. And again, we need to take care of that. And even private resources like mine, when we can use our resources for such important things, it makes what we do as a business even more interesting, even more exciting. So restoring our common patrimony in each country, our common culture is a priority for everyone. It should be considered like this.
François-Henri Pinault, the Chairman and Chief Executive of Kering. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us from Paris. Both of you have heard Professor Toker and Professor Dong from Mr. Pinault. Certainly, that's one of those efforts made right now in order to contribute to the rebuild and renovation of Notre-Dame. But what do you make of this when it comes to the French circumstances? Professor Toker, the country has been having some problems earlier, for example, with the Yellow Vest. We have seen the president trying to rally the whole nation. Is this a moment that would bring all the hearts and minds together for something bigger than what culture can really bring to us, and also culture can transform us?
It is. It is. It is a moment with a capital M. I mean, this does not have historical importance, but just in order to contextualize what you said in your introduction to the question you put to me, not only France has gone through a crisis, it is still within a major political, social crisis. And as a matter of fact, President Macron just finished to record yesterday evening a 20-minute speech to the nation, which was supposed to be on the air at 8 p.m. In the evening yesterday. And as he came out of the studio at the presidential palace of the Élysée, he was told that fire has taken the Notre-Dame Cathedral. And of course, he took right away the decision to postpone the speech to the nation due to the circumstances, and then later on went down to the Ile de la Cité to visit the cathedral. So yes, this moment will serve, so to speak, in order to bring up to the surface the elements which unite the nation and unite humanity to some extent. The shocks have this quality of bringing people together due to sorrow, due to pain. Now, one shouldn't exaggerate in that in terms of political analysis, but it is certainly one of those rare instances, in which you see that we may transcend, and particular political, social, or economic events do transcend the sense of historical events when they are faced by something which we all feel is bigger than us and transcends indeed the immediate meaning we tend to give to so many small details and less small details.
I see. Professor Dong, of course, the Chinese President Xi Jinping, as we know earlier, not long ago made a trip to France in Paris as well. And also Chinese tourists are going to Paris in abundance. So what do you think, even with this tragedy, but now seem to be an incident that would bring the whole country together and probably even the rest of the world on the symbol. What would that mean for many of the Chinese who are having much respect of the French culture?
I think it will, for the tourists, Chinese tourists, it will be a moment to read the book again. And when we go to Paris and go to the cathedral, I think everyone will have the book in our in our pocket with us. And I think it's also a moment for us to know a little more about the interior, the construction, the historical, and I think the people will pay much more attention to the monument because it's destroyed or partly destroyed.
If we turn the sorrow into strength, that would be really something, and that is certainly what Notre-Dame has been contributing to us throughout the centuries. For now, I want to thank the two of you, Professor Dong Qiang and Professor Joab Toker, joining us in our program in Beijing and in Paris. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Japan and the U.S. kick off their first round of trade negotiations. The talks are being held by U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and his Japanese counterpart. The U.S. has spelled out 22 specific negotiation areas, including non-tariff barriers in Japan's auto market. The U.S. has historically been Japan's biggest ally. However, trade ties between the two nations seem to have undergone some changes since President Donald Trump took office. Let's take a look.
Cars are a sore spot in U.S.-Japan relations. That's what U.S. President Donald Trump says about the economic ties between Washington and Tokyo. Trump believes trade with Japan is neither fair nor open.
The United States has a massive trade deficit with Japan, $100 billion a year. Japan sends us millions and millions of cars, and we tax them virtually not at all.
Since Washington's withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement, or the TPP, economic ties between the old allies have soured. Last March, Trump levied a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum imported from all countries except Canada and Mexico. Japan is the only major ally not given an exception. Tokyo hit back with a threat to slap tariffs on U.S. imports worth over $400 million. No wonder Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe may be considering new market opening opportunities.
Now, when there is rising concern over protectionism in the world, there is more attention than ever from the world to see whether Asia can stay united and keep raising the flag of free trade.
Last July, Abe attended the ASEAN-related summit meetings, reaffirming Tokyo's support of the regional comprehensive economic partnership with ASEAN countries. Meanwhile, the talks for a China-Japan-South Korea free trade agreement are also underway. And on February 1st, the European Union-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement entered into force. Tokyo's strategy seems to be looking for leverage with as many countries and regions as possible for new trade opportunities. With Youyang, Timothy Ulrich for CGTN.
And for more on U.S.-Japan trade talks, we are joined in Hong Kong by Kato Yachikatsu, Adjunct Associate Professor of the Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. And in our Beijing studio, we have Terry Miller, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN and also Director of the Center for International Trade and Economics from the Heritage Foundation. It's good to have you here in our Beijing studio.
It's good to be here.
And also Professor Wu Changqi from the Guanghua School of Management at Peking University. Welcome, Professor, as well.
Thank you.
I want to start with you, Ambassador Miller. How necessary, if you think about it, is it for this trade talks between Japan and the United States? What really can be achieved now?
I think a lot can be achieved. There are obvious tensions in the world trading system right now, many of them caused by my own country. But nonetheless, it's in the interest of all of countries, I think, Japan, China, the United States, and all of our trading partners to work as cooperatively as we can to work out our differences. And there are differences between the United States and Japan.
Like what? What do you think is the issue here? There's a lot of talk about currency, but certainly there are other issues as well.
Yes, I actually don't think currency is a very important issue between the United States and Japan. Japan's not what I would term a currency manipulator, so I think there will be a provision there, but it will just be a pro forma mention of currency. Much more important are things like agricultural trade for the United States, and from the Japanese side, the need to maintain their automobile exports to the United States.
Well, now, Mr. Kato, those are very passionate topics for Japanese, certainly, the Japanese farmers and also the car manufacturers. Mr. Kato, what can you expect, really, from Tokyo's perspective?
I think, of course, this is a very important talk, and I think Japan and the United States are going to talk very positive manner, and frankly. But I think maybe U.S. and Japan now we have some different concerns. For example, Japan make more emphasis on TAG, a trade agreement on goods. But maybe the United States want to talk about currency issue. And now Japanese government want to put these issues in more multilateral ways. But U.S. Trump administration wants to be more sticky to the bilateral ways. So I think U.S. and Japan, we are allies. That's why we can talk very frankly. And we can have basic trust mutually, but now we have some different concerns and even different interests on these issues. So I think it's unlikely to be resolved very quickly.
Well, Mr. Kato, I want to follow up a little bit. I mean, talk friendly, certainly that's a beautiful thing, but will talk friendly necessarily going to solve the problem? That's not necessarily leading from one to the other, is it?
Yeah. I think it's unlikely to be resolved very quickly because now of course Japan, we are very making a point of the relation with the United States. Even the Mr. Trump takes office, but maybe he is implementing some irresponsible or some inward-looking policies. But we still trying to talk with Mr. Trump and want to strengthen the U.S.-Japan alliances.
Ambassador Miller, I have to come back to you now. I mean, you think about that. There are certainly economic and trade issues, but on the other hand, there's also ideology issues. And ideology, I didn't mean political system, but rather how do you look at the world trade that should be run? From Japan's perspective, obviously multilateral for a smaller, relatively, economy and smaller population, that's the way to go. But for the United States, the current administration looking at bilateral as this favorite.
Well, there's
and the deal, so-called.
There's a certain amount of dissatisfaction right now, certainly by the Trump administration, with the performance of the World Trade Organization in particular.
WTO negotiation is going to happen later this year as different countries put in already their proposals for how to reform. But there are other platforms, like multilateral, rather than just the WTO. For example, CPTPP, which Japan is absolutely passionate about, Mr. Ambassador.
Well, of course, and that's a big advantage for these trade talks between the United States and Japan, because a lot of the heavy lifting in this negotiation has already been accomplished in the context of negotiations for the TPP. So the U.S. withdrew from that process, but nonetheless, there's a pretty good understanding between the Japanese side and the U.S. side of where a possible agreement might lie between the two countries.
Is it, Mr. Kato?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think, of course, TPP, now we say TPP 11. Of course, it's a pity that the United States, withdraw from the TPP, but now Japan is still trying to lead the negotiating process, I think, and Japanese, want to believe the United States could be back in the future. So now what we can do is consistently, promoting this trade TPP and including some, regional agreement based on the free and fair, multilateralism and trade system, and this is very important for Asia-Pacific region.
It is a multilateral approach for the Asia-Pacific region. Professor Wu, you've been tentatively listening to your two other colleagues from Japan and the American side. Now it's your time to talk, I guess. There are two things going on at the same time. One is U.S.-China trade negotiations, which is likely to pave the way for the nature of a new stage of relationship between the two countries. On the other hand, you also have China-Japan getting a little bit much closer than it used to be. After all, the foreign minister is visiting China, and we're seeing G20 summits likely to taking place with the two heads of states also likely to meet, but we do not know yet for the moment. But Professor, it's a very mixed picture, isn't it? How is China feeling about this? I mean, right now, this hot topic also, trade negotiations between the United States and Japan.
I think in a broader view, that current tensions and negotiations are under a process of deepening of globalization. Because when World Trade Organization was established in 1995, actually that pushed the globalization, that stimulated the international trade. When trade volume picked up, particularly in China, became major trade partners with many countries. So the traditional World Trade Organization, the framework, has some tensions. So now, particularly after Trump administration, right, and they want to get out its world trade system. They want to have a bilateral, right, China and the U.S. Talk about trade tensions. But now I think, by and large, as you see the people, not only myself, are more optimistic about the U.S.-China trade negotiations. The major obstacles has been ironed out. Right? There are such remaining ones. But regarding China and Japan's trade relationship, of course, these are both with U.S. and with China, with Japan, are two of the major trading partners. But of course, China, and for the past quite some time, China trying to stimulate the regional trade with free trade agreement. But that's because of the atmosphere. Right, then the other kind of the and it was put on hold. But now it's accelerating. Japan, Korea, and China. Right, that is the big framework. For instance, if Japan has a political will and the will of business communities, probably that could accelerate.
So it seems that it's a fascinating picture. I mean, the three gentlemen that I'm talking to, you have just described. It's everybody play with all kinds of options that they have on hand, whether they really like it or they pretend not to like it. So, Mr. Kato, for Japan, there must be a bottom line and a tipping point when it comes to a negotiation of any kind. So, what is it for Japan?
Actually, Japan and the United States, we have been allied for a long time. So sometimes we need to distribute our mission. So now we are looking at relatively, the U.S. is somehow reluctant to make a commitment to this region. So now it's a chance for Japan. Japan can implement some leadership on promoting these regional trade negotiations. Actually, this is a great political chance for Mr. Abe as well. So now Japan is trying to implementing these negotiations simultaneously. One is TPP-11, one is RCEP. When our Foreign Minister Kono Taro visited Beijing, they say, we want to conclude our RCEP negotiation within the end of this year, or we want to make more commitment on Japan, China, and ROK's free trade agreement.
Mr.
So
Kato,
now
we
can implement.
Yes, we are saying that, Mr. Kato. I see you saying it with a lot of light in your eyes. This is certainly an opportunity for Japan, as you have just described. But Mr. Wu, Professor, tell us about that. I mean, TPP, of course, China is not part of it. China has not been invited. Well, there's agreement about whether it's being invited or not. But on the other hand, RCEP, RCEP, it's a big concept that many here in Asia Pacific subscribe to, certainly China included. So how are you seeing that China is also playing different hands? Multilateral, bilateral, regional, different concepts. Can China be a winner? While the U.S. and Japan are continuing with their allied relationship, but at the same time discussing about trade, to say the least, Professor?
I think indeed all these measures are largely trade promotion measures.
Exactly.
Right? Even, let's say, U.S.-China trade negotiation lets China also introduce some further deepening and opening of its economy. Right? With the RCEP, that has been negotiated for quite some time, but it is very complex because it involves two of the most populous nations, China and India, and other things. But of course, the economic development level, also these regions are very much diverse. But this, if they go through, that's definitely, China would be one of the beneficiaries.
In the 1970s, Mr. Ambassador, Japan and the United States were in a trade war.
Yes.
And of course, the two economies taking shape as a result of it in very different ways. And some also argue the so-called lost 10 years or even 20 years of Japan had anything to do with it. Now, we are seeing China and the U.S. now at a different juncture of trade discussion. So, which is making our discussion today ever more relevant to see where were the past and what is the present and how can we see the future. So, Mr. Ambassador, I want to have some of your thoughts because you've been experiencing different parts of what I just mentioned.
Yes, and it's interesting that...
And it's not a diplomatic answer.
Some of the, you know, we're hearing some of the same rhetoric now between the United States and China that we heard between the United States and Japan 30 years ago. And I think the parameters of the negotiation even are similar in some respects. But there are tremendous opportunities for all of the countries in the region to promote trade and increase their prosperity, and it doesn't particularly matter which country takes the lead in this process. If we can be leaders in that process from the United States, that's great, but if Japan can take a leadership role, that's great too. If China can, the challenge for China is that it still lags behind some of the other countries in the region in terms of its economic policies, its free market type policies, and that of course is one of the issues between China and some of the other countries. So the question with these China-centered agreements is what kind of standards will actually be employed in them? Will they be the same high standards that we expect in trade between Japan, the European Union, the United States, and other countries?
Standard is, of course, one thing, and that has been very much worked on from China's perspective, at least. But on the other hand, Professor Wu, there's one concept that Ambassador Miller just mentioned. I'm not sure whether the Chinese really agree with that. That is China-centered mechanisms. As China has been at least talking about it, about the win-win situation and the mechanism, everybody become a player and have interactions with one another rather than a China-centered or a geopolitics-centered approach, Professor Wu.
That's an interesting issue because in the world after the Second World War, by and large, trade and investment are US-centric. That means if any company want to make a big company, you have to do well in the US market. The Japanese companies, the Korean companies doing the same. But in last 10 to 20 years, particularly China became a member of the World Trade Organization, the many of manufacturer activities takes place in the mainland China. So that China becomes the world manufacturing center. So many
and
of
now it's different also.
Now it's still moving that direction still, right? Of course, we could broaden this to North Asia, Japan, Korea, and mainland China. Right? That become manufacturing center of the world. So for many businesses, particularly from developing countries, they find their product, their raw materials could serve China. In that process, they would benefit from that. I would not rather call this China-centric, right? But at least China is one of the center of economic activity at the current stage of the world.
Right. Knowing the fact that you two know each other already before you come into the studio, this is already quite an interesting debate. But
we are in an academic organization that promote international business. That's called Academy of International Business.
Right, exactly. We'll have you to talk a bit later, but Mr. Kato, I still want to involve you into this conversation. How do you see that? I mean, history, present, future, in a way, all in this taking place now as we speak. Mr. Kato.
Yeah, I think for Japan, there are very few space to pursue because we are allies with the United States. But now China is the largest trading partner for Japan. And we are located in Asia-Pacific region. So what we can do is, on one hand, strengthen the U.S.-Japan alliance. But we want to push U.S. be more responsible for regional integration. And at the same time, Mr. Ambassador said, we are still a bit skeptical on which kind of way China are going to pursue, including so-called the China model. So that's why China, I believe China wants to be more accountable, more transparent. So Japan needs to work with China at the same time in order to realize more rule and value-based and multilateral free trade system and the regional integration. So this is what Japan can do, and this is exactly what Japan wants to do.
And it seems that,
in the future.
Okay, got it. Mr. Kato said very interestingly, because even on infrastructure building these days, Professor Wu, that Japan and China begins to see one another as opportunities. That is quite a movement, shall we say, compared to, let's just say, half a year ago. So how do you see this potential that everyone plays all the possibilities as much as possible for what you consider as promotion of trade and economic exchanges? Professor Wu, briefly from you.
Actually, China and Japan cooperate in many fronts, but the infrastructure construction definitely is one of them. Because actually Japanese company move abroad much earlier than China. And China's Belt Road Initiative is only recent thing, but they can learn from each other, cooperative in some of infrastructure projects. But it's not one country's work. It's helping developing countries to build infrastructure and promote trade.
Right. When we start our conversation, it was only about Japan-U.S. trade negotiations. But none of the topics these days, if you look at our world, borrowing your word, globalization, can only be examined with one angle, but rather different ways. So before we go, one final sentence from every one of you. How do you see that negotiations going? What is going to tell us about it? What is that going to tell us about? Mr. Ambassador.
The U.S. and Japan have a very solid economic base and relationship together. Look for a negotiation that's going to continue for some time and have a positive result.
All right, Mr. Kato.
Yeah, I agree. U.S. and Japan, U.S.-Japan can work together and push forward our multilateral and rule and value-based regional integration. But we have to learn to work with China.
Okay, all right. Last but not least, Professor Wu.
Before I came, I visited U.S. Trade Representative Office website. It's mentioned, highlighted by U.S.-Japan trade negotiations. I look at the item. It seems to be in 40 years ago, same item. Auto trade, agricultural. After 50 years, the trade negotiators still negotiate that thing, right? That thing is something, of course, the frictions may not easily go away, but people would work out some way.
All right. With that positive note, well, do we have a positive note? It seems we have. Professor Wu Changqi, Ambassador Terry Miller, and Mr. Kato Yoshikatsu. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Goodbye.